I still remember that morning vividly. The moment when my entire world shattered. If someone had told me that a heart could break from just a few words, I would have never believed it. Until I witnessed the man I loved most walk out the door, leaving me and our newborn twins behind. I once believed that love could overcome any obstacle. That as long as we were together, nothing could tear us apart. But I was wrong. Love, it turns out, is not always strong enough to triumph over greed, ambition, and the manipulation of a woman who calls herself a mother. That was the day I realized that my children and I had never truly belonged in his world. I met Daniel on an autumn afternoon when golden leaves covered the small streets of New York. I was an interior designer, newly moved to the city in search of opportunities after graduating from college. As for him, Daniel Montgomery, he was the heir to the Montgomery & Co. real estate empire, a powerful family that owned luxury properties stretching from Manhattan to Los Angeles. But I didn't know any of that when we first met by chance at a small cafe on the side of the street. Back then, Daniel was just a charming guy with a warm smile and bright blue eyes that sparkled when he looked at me. Not a man carrying the weight of an entire dynasty on his shoulders. We fell in love quickly, the way young couples often do when they are filled with passion and hope. Daniel wasn't like other wealthy men. He never flaunted his money, never acted distant or arrogant. Instead, he was kind, gentle, and made me feel like I was the only person in his world. Those first months together were the happiest time of my life. I loved him with all my heart, never realizing that love alone wouldn't be enough to withstand the crushing weight of the Montgomery name and its legacy. When I became pregnant, Daniel was overjoyed. He held me in his arms and promised to protect me and our child forever. But love and promises were not strong enough to stand against his mother, Margaret Montgomery, a woman with piercing gray eyes and a heart of steel. I still remember the first time I met her, just a week after Daniel found out I was pregnant. She invited us to a lavish party at the Montgomery estate, where crystal chandeliers illuminated walls adorned with paintings by famous artists. The moment I stepped inside, I knew I didn't belong there. The women in their extravagant evening gowns eyed me with scrutiny. The men, mostly business associates of the family, barely acknowledged my presence as they moved through the grand room filled with power and prestige. Margaret Montgomery sat at the center of the room, a glass of red wine in her hand, her cold gray eyes scanning me from head to toe. She did not display immediate hostility, instead she wore a polite but utterly insincere smile. But I knew from that very first moment that she had already decided I was unworthy. "Daniel tells me you're pregnant," she said, her voice devoid of any real emotion. How unexpected. I didn't know how to respond. I tightened my grip on Daniel's hand, feeling the tension in his body. He forced a weak smile, trying to maintain a pleasant atmosphere, but I could see the worry in his eyes. Throughout the entire evening, Margaret said nothing more to me, but I knew this wasn't over. And just as I had feared, a few days later Daniel began to change. He became distant, lost in thought, frequently sleepless, and constantly receiving mysterious phone calls from his mother. When I asked, he simply reassured me that everything was fine, that I had nothing to worry about. But the unease inside me grew stronger with each passing day. By the time I gave birth to our twins, I was certain that something was wrong. Daniel was still there at the hospital, still smiling gently as he held our babies in his arms, but there was an invisible wall between us. A distance I couldn't cross. And then, on that fateful morning, I got my answer. Daniel stepped into our small apartment, his eyes hollow, his shoulders heavy as if he were carrying an entire mountain on his back. I was holding our newborns, gently rocking them to soothe their cries. When I saw him, I smiled, believing he had come to start our new life together. But that smile quickly faded when I saw the look on his face. "We need to talk," he whispered. I placed the babies in their crib and turned to him with growing concern. "What's wrong, Daniel?" He didn't answer immediately. He swallowed hard, his eyes avoiding mine. "I can't do this anymore," he finally said, his voice weak and trembling. "I just can't." My heart stopped. "Can't do what?" Daniel took a deep breath as if the words he was about to say would destroy everything. I have to leave." The air in the room turned ice cold. I could feel my heart shattering, each fragment piercing deep into my chest. "Leave?" I repeated, my voice barely a whisper. "What do you mean, Daniel?" He looked at me with tortured eyes, but there was no hesitation in his expression. He had already made up his mind. "My mother was right. he said, his voice thick with emotion. We don't belong in the same world. I can't stay. Tears streamed down my face before I could stop them. I shook my head, refusing to believe what I was hearing. You're leaving me, leaving your own children just because she told you to? Daniel didn't respond. In that moment, I realized that the man I loved was gone. In his place stood a coward, a puppet controlled by his mother, a man willing to trade his wife and children for the security of his inheritance. Daniel turned his back on me and walked toward the door. I wanted to scream, to run to him and beg him to stay, but my body was frozen in place. I'm sorry, he said, but he didn't dare look back. The door slammed shut behind him, leaving me alone with our newborn twins and a shattered heart. I sat there, staring at the closed door where Daniel had just walked out. A part of me still hoped it would open again, that he would return and tell me this was all just a nightmare. But that didn't happen. In this tiny apartment, it was just me and my 2 newborns, completely unaware of the loss I was carrying. Tears fell silently down my face as I gazed at the 2 fragile lives lying in the crib. They had no idea that their father had just turned his back on them, abandoning me to raise them alone. The first days after Daniel left were the darkest of my life. I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep, I couldn't do anything except hold my babies close and cry. At night, the apartment felt empty and unbearably cold. The sound of their tiny cries echoed off the walls, blending with my own muffled sobs. I was completely drained, physically and emotionally. My body still ached from childbirth, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the feeling of being abandoned. I couldn't forget the moment Daniel stood there, his eyes filled with guilt but no real struggle. He had chosen the easiest way out, walking away. All the promises of love and devotion had suddenly turned into meaningless words. During those days, I felt like a different person. I let myself drown in despair, shutting out the world entirely. My phone rang countless times, friends, acquaintances, people who were worried about me, but I never picked up. I didn't know how to face them, didn't know what to say when all I had left was a broken heart and 2 babies depending on me. But then, one night as the rain tapped against the window, a truth I couldn't ignore finally settled in. I didn't have time to grieve anymore. These 2 little souls needed me. If I continued like this, who would take care of them? Who would hold them when they were sick, when they needed love and warmth? Daniel had chosen to walk away from them, but I never would. I wiped my tears, took a deep breath, and for the first time in days I told myself, I had to get up. The next day I started looking for a job, but life wasn't as easy as I had hoped. Before my pregnancy, I worked at a small interior design firm in Manhattan. However, as my due date approached, I had to take a break to prepare for the arrival of my twins. After Daniel left, I wanted to return to work, only to find that my position had been replaced. No one wanted to hire a single mother who had just given birth, someone who couldn't work late hours or maintain the flexible schedule that other employees could. I sent out countless job applications, but every single one was rejected. Some recruiters were blunt, telling me outright that I wasn't a good fit because I would have to devote too much time to my children. Others were more polite, simply stating that they needed someone who could give their full commitment. Something they didn't believe I could do. Every rejection email felt like another failure. But I couldn't give up. I had no other choice but to keep searching. There were days when I felt utterly hopeless, but whenever I looked into the clear, innocent eyes of my 2 children, I found the strength to keep going. I cut out every unnecessary expense and learned to live as frugally as possible. I couldn't afford childcare, so I had to manage everything on my own. The sleepless nights continued not because I was grieving anymore, but because my babies woke up in turns throughout the night. I learned how to change diapers with one hand while scrolling through job listings with the other. I focused on remote work, hoping to earn some income while staying home with my children. After weeks of persistence, I finally found a freelance job, doing interior design for a small company. The pay wasn't great, but at least it covered our basic needs. I worked late into the night, after my children had fallen asleep, with nothing but the glow of my computer screen illuminating the dark room. The following months were a true battle. I was a mother, an employee, and the sole provider for my family. There were days when exhaustion weighed so heavily on me that I wanted to give up, but I couldn't. I had already lost so much. I couldn't afford to lose myself too. Gradually I realized that my pain wasn't as sharp as before. It was still there, lingering like a wound that hadn't fully healed, but it no longer controlled me. I was no longer the weak woman crying in the corner of a room. I was a mother of two, and I would not let life break me. I still didn't know what the future held, but at least I had started walking my own path, and this time I wouldn't let anyone decide my fate for me. I had grown used to long, sleepless nights. When my children finally drifted into deep sleep, I would sit in front of my computer, the pale blue light casting soft shadows on my tired face. Freelance interior design work barely covered our expenses, but I knew I couldn't keep living like this. I needed something bigger, something that truly belonged to me. The idea came to me one late afternoon as I was folding clothes for my twins. I realized that most children's clothing on the market looked the same, nothing special. The well-designed outfits were ridiculously expensive, while the affordable ones were poorly made. I thought to myself, why not create clothes that were both beautiful and comfortable for kids? I wasn't a fashion designer, but I had always loved creating things. When I was a child, my mother taught me how to sew tiny dresses for my dolls. She was no longer around, but those skills had stayed with me. So, I decided to give it a try. I borrowed an old sewing machine from my downstairs neighbor and started with simple pieces. Soft newborn onesies, stretchy leggings, and little dresses for baby girls. At first, I only made them for my own children, but when I posted pictures online, a few friends asked me where they could buy them. That was the moment I realized I had an opportunity. I didn't have much money to invest, but I had determination. Every spare dollar I earned went into buying fabric and supplies. I taught myself how to sew better, how to create more refined designs, and how to run an online business. It was harder than I thought. I listed my products online, but no one seemed interested. I emailed mom and baby bloggers but received no replies. Once I even got a small order, but the customer canceled at the last minute. The rejections piled up, and I started questioning if I was just wasting my time. But then, one night, as I watched my babies sleep peacefully in the outfits I had made for them, I knew I couldn't give up. I had come too far to turn back. I changed my approach. I took better, more professional photos of my products, built a small website, and started a blog, where I shared my journey as a single mother and how I was building my brand from nothing. I joined parenting groups on social media, sharing my experiences while subtly introducing my products. Slowly, little by little, the first orders began to come in. My very first customer was a young mother in Chicago. She ordered a newborn outfit for her baby girl. When I received the payment notification, I burst into tears, not because of the money, but because it was proof that I wasn't hopeless. Then came the second order, the third. Soon I started receiving messages from mothers thanking me, telling me how soft and comfortable my clothes were for their babies. Some even sent pictures of their little ones wearing my designs, their tiny faces glowing with joy. I named my brand Little Blessings because that's exactly what my twins had given me. A reason to keep going. The following months were an endless battle. I worked day and night, caring for my children, sewing clothes, packing orders, and managing my website. My small apartment had turned into a mini sewing workshop, with piles of fabric stacked everywhere and spools of thread scattered across the floor. Every morning I woke up before my children to answer customer emails. In the afternoon, while they napped, I cut fabric and sewed. At night, when everything fell silent, I stayed up learning about marketing, advertising, and brand development. I was exhausted, but I had never felt more alive. Then one day something unexpected happened. One of my posts went viral on social media. A well-known mom influencer on Instagram shared her love for Little Blessings, praising the quality and elegant design of my products. Overnight, my inbox was flooded with messages and orders skyrocketed. I couldn't believe my eyes. I had to call a friend to help me pack shipments because I couldn't keep up with the overwhelming demand. I quickly found a small local workshop to help produce my most popular designs. In just 6 months, Little Blessings had transformed from a small online shop into a well-established name in the children's fashion industry. I was no longer just working to survive. I was building a future for myself and my children. For the first time in years, I felt proud of myself. One evening, as I was folding clothes to prepare for shipping, I received an email from a major mother and baby retail chain in New York. They wanted to collaborate, to bring Little Blessings into their stores. I set my phone down, my hands trembling. This was an opportunity I had never dared to dream of. I turned to look at my sleeping children, my heart swelling with gratitude. I had lost so much, but in the process, I had found myself. And I knew this was only the beginning. I never thought I would be standing here today. From a woman abandoned and struggling in a cramped apartment with 2 infants, I was now running a thriving children's fashion brand. Little Blessings was no longer just a small online store. It had become a recognized name in mom communities, featured in articles about female entrepreneurs, and even made its way onto the shelves of major retail chains. Looking back on my journey, it still felt like a dream I once thought was impossible. But the most incredible part wasn't the success or the money I had earned. The most incredible part was that I had found myself again. I was no longer the weak woman crying behind a closed door, watching the man who abandoned her walk away. I stood up. I had built a life I could be proud of, one that was mine and mine alone. Every morning as I wake up in my more spacious apartment, watching my 2 children giggle and run around, I know I am on the right path. I no longer worry about how to afford milk for them, nor do I spend sleepless nights counting the last few coins in my wallet. Now I can provide them with a comfortable life, think about the future without the constant weight of uncertainty pressing down on me. But above all, there is one thing that matters most. I no longer resent Daniel. At first, I thought I would never be able to forgive him. He abandoned me when I was at my weakest, choosing money and power over his own family. But over time, I realized that holding on to resentment only kept me trapped in the past. Daniel no longer had a place in my life, and his existence no longer affected the path I was walking. One day, as I was reviewing my work schedule, I received a text message from an unknown number. "Amanda, it's Daniel, can we meet?" I stared at the message, a strange feeling washing over me. It had been years since I had last heard from him. After leaving me, Daniel had completely disappeared from our lives. I had no idea how he had been living, whether he was happy with his decision or not. But none of that mattered to me anymore. I put my phone down without replying. That afternoon, I sat in my small office, browsing through the latest designs for my upcoming product line. I couldn't stop my mind from drifting to the past, but this time it didn't bring me pain. I remembered the day Daniel walked out of our tiny apartment, the crushing despair that consumed me then. But I also remembered everything I had done to rebuild my life. I was no longer that woman. I was stronger, more resilient, and I no longer needed anyone else to complete me. The days that followed were busier than ever. I had an interview with a major magazine about my entrepreneurial journey, a meeting with a business partner to expand my brand, and countless orders to fulfill. Each day was another step forward in the journey I had chosen for myself. And then one day, I saw Daniel again. It was a Sunday morning when I took my children to the park. As I sat on a bench, watching them run and play, I felt a gaze from a distance. Daniel stood there, just a few meters away from me. He looked completely different from the last time I had seen him. Gone was the confident, proud man he once was. Instead, he looked exhausted, slightly older, and his eyes carried the weight of sorrow. He took a step closer, but I had no intention of standing up or showing any emotion. When he finally stopped in front of me, I simply looked up, waiting. "I wasn't sure if you'd even want to see me," Daniel said, his voice hesitant. I remained silent for a long moment before answering. "Then why are you here?" Daniel glanced at the children before turning back to me. "I saw you in the papers, saw your success, and I realized I was wrong. I wasn't surprised. I had expected this." "You realized that a little too late," I replied calmly. Daniel gave a sad smile. "I know." He looked down, his hands clenched tightly. "I just wanted to say that I'm sorry. Not because I expect your forgiveness, or because I want to come back, but because I truly regret what I did." I gave him a small nod. "Are you done?" He hesitated, as if he hadn't expected this response from me. I looked directly at him, without anger, without sadness. "Daniel, I've come a long way to be where I am today, and none of that has anything to do with you anymore." I didn't say anything else. I simply stood up and walked toward my children, leaving Daniel standing there alone. I didn't look back, nor did I care whether he was still watching. For the first time in years, I felt light. Daniel had once been a part of my story, but he was no longer the main character. I was, and I knew that I had won. Not against him, but against the pain of my past. I walked forward, holding my children's hands, looking ahead. No looking back, no regrets. Daniel sat alone in the vast Montgomery estate, the silence almost deafening. Since leaving me and our children, he had gained everything his mother had promised him: a secure career, an immense fortune, prestige, and a place among the elite. And yet none of it had filled the emptiness inside him. Lavish parties, high-profile business meetings, and luxury vacations, all of it passed by meaninglessly. When the spotlight faded, when the praises quieted down, Daniel was left alone in the suffocating silence. No one truly cared about him. No one loved him unconditionally, the way I once did. And then, one day, everything changed. Daniel was sitting in his office when the sound of my voice echoed from the large TV screen mounted on the wall. He flinched, his head snapping up. On the screen, I was being interviewed on a morning talk show, sitting across from a well-known host. "Your story is truly an inspiration to so many women out there," the host said with a warm smile. "From being a single mother abandoned by her husband to now building a successful children's fashion brand. Can you share a little about your journey?" I smiled softly, my gaze calm and full of confidence. A version of me Daniel had never seen before. "At first I didn't think I could do it," I said. "But I realized that if I didn't stand up for myself, no one else would. I had 2 children who needed me, and I couldn't let the past hold me back forever." On the screen, images of me and my children appeared. We were playing in a park, laughing, dressed in outfits I had designed myself. The host continued, "Your brand, Little Blessings, has made a huge impact in the children's fashion industry. What has been the most important lesson for you in this journey?" I smiled again. "The most important thing was learning to believe in myself. I am no longer the woman I used to be. No longer afraid, no longer dependent on anyone. I built my happiness on my own." Daniel felt his chest tighten, his eyes remained glued to the screen as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. I had completely transformed. I was no longer the fragile woman he had abandoned. I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. The final image before the segment ended showed me holding my 2 children, all 3 of us smiling radiantly. Daniel turned off the TV, but the images didn't leave his mind. He suddenly realized he had been wrong. So devastatingly, irreversibly wrong. For years he had tried to convince himself that he had made the right choice, that leaving me was the best decision. But now, seeing me happy and strong without him, he finally understood that he had lost the most precious thing in his life. He couldn't bear the thought that I had truly moved on without him. Without hesitation, Daniel grabbed his car keys and rushed out of the estate. He had no idea what he would say, no idea if I would even want to see him, but he couldn't continue living with this regret any longer. By the time he arrived at my apartment, the sky had darkened. Everything was different from the day he left. Back then, I lived in a small, cramped apartment, but now, I had moved into a spacious, elegant home. Modern yet warm. Daniel stood at the door, his heart pounding. He wasn't sure how I would react, but he knew he had to try. He rang the doorbell. A few seconds later, the door opened. I stood there, still me, yet no longer the same. I was stronger, more confident, and my eyes no longer carried any trace of sorrow when I looked at him. Daniel opened his mouth but didn't know what to say. I crossed my arms, my voice calm. "What are you doing here?" Daniel swallowed hard. I saw you on TV." I remained silent, waiting. He exhaled, trying to steady himself. "I was wrong, Amanda. I was wrong from the beginning. I should never have left you. I let my mother control my life and I lost everything." I tilted my head slightly, my expression unreadable. "And now you realize that?" Daniel nodded, his eyes filled with regret. "I know it's too late, but I need you to know that I truly regret it. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect another chance. I need you to know that you were the only person I ever loved." I looked at him for a long moment before replying softly, "Daniel, I don't need that." He froze. "What?" I smiled, but it wasn't a soft smile. It was a smile of liberation. "I don't need to know whether you loved me or not. I've moved on. I've built a life that I'm proud of, and you are no longer a part of it." Daniel stood frozen, as if he had finally come to terms with the truth. I continued, You chose your path a long time ago, and so did I. Now I'm happy, and I don't need a painful past coming back to disrupt my life." Daniel lowered his head, his eyes filled with sorrow. He knew he couldn't change the past. I took a deep breath and spoke softly. "Take care of yourself, Daniel." Then I closed the door. Daniel stood there for a long moment, staring at the closed door in front of him. A light breeze passed by, carrying a deep sense of loss with it. He had everything, then lost it all. And this time he knew there was no getting it back. Daniel remained standing outside, motionless before the door that had just shut in his face. A part of him wanted to knock again, to beg for a chance, but deep down he knew it was pointless. I was no longer the woman I once was, the woman who had pleaded through tears for him to stay. I had moved on. I had built a life without him, and Daniel was finally forced to face the reality that he had lost everything. He turned away, his steps heavy as he walked out of the apartment complex. A sharp gust of cold wind slipped through his coat, but he didn't even notice. His mind was empty, except for the echo of my words ringing in his head. "You are no longer a part of my life." Those words cut through him like a knife, but there was no one to blame but himself. By the time he returned to the Montgomery estate, the grand mansion loomed against the night, its golden light spilling through the towering windows. It was still as magnificent as ever, still a symbol of power and status. The very things he had chosen over his own family. But tonight all Daniel could see was how empty and lifeless it felt. He stepped into the vast foyer, where the scent of oak wood and his mother's expensive perfume lingered in the air. Everything was perfect. The intricate Persian rugs, the oil paintings on the walls, the carefully placed luxury furniture. But there was no warmth in any of it. Margaret Montgomery sat in her usual armchair, swirling a glass of red wine in her hand. When she saw her son walk in, she didn't look surprised. "Where have you been?" Her voice was as cold as ever. Daniel didn't answer right away. He shrugged off his coat, placed it over a chair, and walked to the bar, pouring himself a glass of whiskey. "I went to see Amanda," he finally said, his voice hoarse. Silence filled the room for a few moments. Margaret set down her wineglass and let out a long, unimpressed sigh. "I suppose you've realized that you no longer have a place in her life." Daniel turned to her, his gaze dark. "You knew?" She smirked. "Did you really think a woman you abandoned would sit around waiting for you forever?" Her words made Daniel tighten his grip around the glass. "You say that as if this wasn't your fault." Margaret let out a small chuckle, but there was no warmth in it. "My fault?" "Daniel, I simply guided you toward the path you were born to walk. You are a Montgomery heir, not some ordinary man with a small, forgettable family. I gave you everything." Daniel scoffed bitterly. "Everything? You really think I have everything?" He slammed his glass down on the table, the liquid spilling across the polished wood. "I have money. I have a career. I have power. But do you know what else I have? Emptiness. Every morning I wake up in this mansion and walk into an office full of people who don't respect me for who I am. They respect me because I'm a Montgomery. I'm surrounded by people, yet I've never felt more alone." Margaret said nothing, her expression unreadable as she watched her son. Daniel continued, his voice unsteady. "Meanwhile, Amanda moved on. She succeeded without me. Our children grew up without me. And He let out a bitter laugh. "All I have left is this place, you, and everything you call everything." Margaret tilted her head, folding her arms across her chest. "So, what do you want, Daniel? Do you expect me to apologize for helping you secure your future?" Daniel laughed, but there was nothing but bitterness in it. "No, Mother, you never apologize. You never regret anything you do." He exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "But I do." He looked straight at his mother, the once bright blue eyes now clouded with exhaustion. "I regret listening to you. I regret losing Amanda. I regret not being there when my children took their first breaths. But most of all, I regret letting you control my life for so many years." Margaret narrowed her eyes slightly, for the first time appearing unsettled by her son's words. Daniel took a deep breath, as if gathering the last of his courage to say what he needed to say. "I'm leaving." Margaret sat up abruptly. "What did you just say?" Daniel glanced around the mansion one last time, his gaze sweeping over the paintings, the luxurious furniture, the expensive decor he once thought he couldn't live without. But now, all of it felt like an empty shell. "I'm leaving," he repeated slowly and clearly. "I can't keep living like this. I don't know where I'll go, I don't know what I'll do, but I can't stay here." Marguerite stood up, her usual composed tone cracking. "You're acting like a fool, Daniel. Do you really think you can walk away from everything? If you step out of that door, you will lose your inheritance, lose everything I have built for you." Daniel smiled, but it wasn't a smile of happiness. It was the smile of a man who had reached his breaking point. "You're right. If I leave, I'll lose everything. But you know what? I lost the most important things a long time ago." He turned, grabbed his coat, and walked out of the mansion. This time, no one ran after him, no one stood at the door to stop him. Only a solitary figure walked away from the extravagant world he once thought he couldn't live without. And for the first time in years, Daniel felt truly free. Morning sunlight streamed through the windows, filling my spacious yet cozy home with warmth. The sound of my children's laughter echoed through the air, blending with the soft aroma of freshly brewed coffee. I sat at my desk, fingers gliding over the keyboard, reviewing the latest contracts for Little Blessings, the brand I had built from nothing. I had come a long way to be here today. From a struggling single mother abandoned at her weakest, I had become a successful entrepreneur, featured in business magazines celebrating women in startups. Little Blessings was no longer just a small online store selling baby clothes. It had grown into a nationally recognized brand, with its products displayed in major retail chains across the U.S. I had even opened 2 flagship stores in New York and Los Angeles, where young mothers came to find beautifully designed clothing for their children. Every day I was busier than ever, yet I never felt tired. Everything I had today was built by my own hands. No one handed it to me. I didn't rely on anyone. And most importantly, I no longer needed Daniel's validation. The day he walked away from the Montgomery estate, leaving behind the luxury he had once fought so hard to protect, I didn't even know. It wasn't until much later that I heard he had given up his inheritance, cut ties with his mother, and started over from nothing. But that no longer mattered to me. I no longer thought of him with resentment, nor did I care about what he was doing or how he felt. He was a part of my past, but that past no longer held any power over me. That afternoon, I took my children to the park. They ran across the lush green grass, their laughter filling the air. I sat on a bench, sipping my coffee, savoring the peace I had fought so hard to achieve. A woman sat down beside me, offering a warm smile. "You're Amanda, aren't you?" she asked, her eyes lighting up with excitement. "The founder of Little Blessings?" I nodded, smiling back. "Oh my God, I'm such a huge fan of yours," she exclaimed. "I've been following your journey for so long. Your story is truly inspiring. You've done what so many women dream of, rising from pain, rebuilding your life, and achieving incredible success." Her words took me by surprise, but a warmth spread through my heart. "I just did what I had to do," I replied. "I refused to let my circumstances define my future." The woman nodded, smiling. "Thank you for sharing your story. You've given strength to so many people." I watched as she walked away, my heart full of emotion. I had never thought my story could inspire others, but now I realized that what I had built wasn't just about providing for my children or making a living. I had become a symbol of resilience, a woman who refused to be defined by her past. That evening I sat on the living room couch, my 2 children curled up in my arms. I told them a bedtime story. Not one about princes or princesses, but about a woman who stood up, overcame hardships, and created her own happiness. "Sue, did she end up happy, Mommy?" my little girl asked, her round eyes looking up at me. I smiled, kissing her forehead. "Yes, sweetheart. She created her own happiness." As I turned off the lights and stepped out of the room, I paused at the doorway, watching my children sleep peacefully. They were all I needed. I didn't need a man to complete me. I didn't need someone to come and save me. I had saved myself. My life, my happiness, my future, all of it was built by my own hands. And for the first time in years, I knew I was truly in control of my destiny. Life doesn't always go the way we expect, but how we face adversity defines who we become. From being abandoned and hitting rock bottom, Amanda rebuilt herself. Refusing to let the past control her future, she didn't need saving. nor did she need validation from the man who once left her behind. Her success, happiness, and freedom were all her own doing. This story isn't about revenge or regret. It's about growth, resilience, and reclaiming one's life. It stands as proof of the strength and determination of a woman in the face of adversity. What do you think about Amanda's journey? Do you agree with her decisions? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to follow the channel for more inspiring stories about life and family.